Before we begin tonight's story, what time is it where you are? And where in the world are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment. I like to imagine all the places these stories drift to while the world sleeps. Now, close your eyes. Breathe in slowly. Let's unlock a forgotten memory together. Tonight's tale is not quite a dream and not yet a memory. It takes place somewhere in between, where love lingers, time forgets itself, and silence speaks louder than words. The ink had bled into the paper, just slightly, leaving behind the faint outline of a name that had once meant something. Still does, perhaps. Her name. The letter was folded into three, held together by a thin silk ribbon, now pale with age, almost translucent in the morning light that slanted through the shutters. I found it this morning. There's a cabinet in the southern wing of the archive, one most visitors never notice. It's not locked, never was, but it rests beneath a wooden beam that groans in winter and above a tile that always stays cold to the touch. No matter the season, the drawer has no label, just dust. And when I opened it, the scent rushed out like a whisper. Old paper, lavender, and something else. The lingering trace of skin warmed by firelight. It brought me back to Avignon. I had been there only once during the winter of 1928. The town was pale with frost. Cobblestones glazed like sugar. The Rhone moved slowly, its surface wrinkled like an old letter folded too many times. The sky was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breath. She lived in a room above a bookstore, and I remember her still, not just how she looked, but how she moved. Like smoke, like music from a gramophone in the next room, the kind you don't realize you've been listening to until it stops. But it's not her smile I remember first. It's the heat of her wrist brushing mine over a table, too narrow for strangers. The sound of her laugh catching in her throat as she leaned in to whisper the most innocent things in the most dangerous tone. The way her dress slid off her left shoulder, just one shoulder, as if gravity had conspired with desire. I remember her perfume, not what it smelled like exactly, but how it felt when it touched my skin, like she had written something there, something only she could read. And then, that night, there was a pause in the fire's crackle, just before she kissed me. Not our first kiss. Those came in fragments, stolen under doorways and behind bookcases. No, this one was different. This one had gravity, like the moon pulling tide. She had said nothing, just exhaled slowly into my collarbone, and I swear to you, I forgot my name. Her hands were cold when they touched the buttons of my coat, but they warmed quickly as they found their way beneath the layers. We stood like that for what felt like hours, undressing not just our bodies, but the parts of us that had remained folded, like this letter, for far too long. I never sent it. That's the truth. I never found the words to explain why I left, or how deeply I regretted it. Maybe I thought I'd go back. Maybe I believed she would wait. Or maybe I feared the letter wouldn't be enough, that nothing could be. And so it stayed here, in the archive, hidden, preserved. And now, after all these years, I open it again, not to send it, but to remember, to unfold, Not just the parchment, but the story itself. The nights, the sighs, the silence after her door clicked shut. It began on a rainy Thursday in December. She was waiting outside a cafe, holding a book like it was a secret. The spine was cracked. Her gloves were worn. I remember that because I noticed her fingers. They were ink-stained. Not elegant. Not careful. Real. She looked up, and I swear she saw me before I even approached, like I was just returning to a place I'd always belonged. I asked for a light. I didn't smoke. She handed me a matchbook without a word, and I pretended to strike one, just for the flicker of heat between us. "Not from around here," she said. "No," I admitted, passing through. "For how long?" "Until someone asks me to stay." She smiled, not as an invitation, but as a warning. "You should never say things like that in Avignon," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because someone always does." And she did. Not then. Not yet. But soon. I saw her again 2 days later. The bookstore. Her domain. I didn't know she owned it until she scolded me for misfiling a Camus novel under poetry. "Existentialism is a kind of poetry," I said. "So, is falling in love with someone you've only just met," she answered, without looking up. The days blurred. The bookstore became our confession booth. Shelves heard secrets we never said out loud. One night, she closed early, said the weather was bad, said she needed wine, said nothing at all as we climbed the narrow staircase above the shop. The room was small, dusty, candlelit. There was music, just barely, playing from a tiny radio she had stolen from her cousin in Lyon. She poured wine into mismatched cups and sat on the windowsill like a scene from a black and white film. "I hate letters," she said suddenly. "They never say what they mean. They're always written after the moment's already dead." I didn't answer. I just looked at her, the curve of her knee beneath the linen of her dress, the shadow of her neck where the candlelight couldn't reach, the place on her lip where she'd once bitten too hard, leaving a mark she no longer noticed. And before I could speak, she kissed me, slow, certain, sad, as if she had known all along that I would leave, but not yet. No, the leaving would come later. First, there was the sound of her dress slipping off her shoulder again, gravity and desire and conspiracy, and silence, the kind that only lovers know, the kind that only memory keeps. I trace the edge of the letter now, feeling the pressure of her words long after the ink has faded. I know what it said. I don't need to read it. I carry its contents in the folds of my breath. But you deserve to hear it. You deserve to know what happened that winter in Avignon, when time moved like candle wax and love unfolded like the pages of a half-read novel. So let me tell you, from the beginning. Avignon, December 1928. The rain had not yet fallen, but the air was thick with its promise. Clouds sagged low over the terracotta rooftops, and the scent of wet stone lingered, like breath held too long. The town was quiet in a way that cities never are anymore. Silence broken only by the wooden clatter of a shutter closing somewhere above, or the distant toll of the cathedral bell, muffled in fog. I was a stranger there, and I liked it that way. I had come by train, with no fixed plan and only one suitcase, a battered brown thing that smelled of old leather and stale tobacco. I was 31, too young to be wise, too old to be innocent. There had been a life before Avignon, lectures, hotels, lovers. But I was shedding it then, as if it were a second skin grown too tight. I remember the cafe first. Its name escapes me now, something with papillon or soleil, but I remember its windows, how they wept from the inside, the condensation catching the afternoon light like tiny silver scars. And I remember her, standing just outside the door, under the narrow awning that did little to shield her from the cold. She wore a wool coat, deep burgundy, and a pale scarf wrapped loosely around her throat. Her hair was tucked beneath a beret, carelessly, as though she had rushed out of the house and never once looked in a mirror. But it suited her. There was nothing deliberate in her beauty. It was like the softness of light through linen curtains, unaware of itself, and therefore devastating. She held a book to her chest. Not a handbag, not a cigarette. A book. That detail struck me. She wasn't killing time. She was holding it. I hesitated before approaching, feigning the search for a match. I knew she had seen me, knew it because her eyes didn't look up in surprise. They rose slowly, expectantly, as though my arrival had been preordained, or, at the very least, not unwelcome. "Do you have a light?" I asked, though I had no cigarette. She tilted her head, amused. "You're not French." "No," I said, "just lost." She reached into her coat and offered me a small matchbook, one with a faint gold print. Her gloves were fingerless, and I noticed the smudge of ink along her ring finger. "A writer?" I asked. She shrugged. "Sometimes. Mostly I correct other people's mistakes." "A critic, then?" "A bookseller." That word, so ordinary, so heavy with possibility. I struck a match and let it burn down to my fingertips before dropping it into the gutter. "I'm staying just over the bridge," I told her, "by the Pont d'Avignon." She smiled faintly. "A romantic spot for someone just passing through." "Are you saying I should stay longer?" "No," she said. "I'm saying you'll want to." And that was the beginning. Her name was Clémence. She owned the bookshop on Rue Saint-Agricole, tucked between a wine merchant and a shop that sold nothing but candles. The sign above her door had once been navy blue, but time had washed it into something closer to slate, and the gold lettering, Librairie du Lys, had begun to peel. Inside, it smelled of dust and bergamot, and something floral, faint, like the memory of perfume on a scarf left behind. I came in the next day, and the day after. I bought nothing the first week, only asked questions, browsed titles, watched her hands move along the spines. She read constantly, poetry in the morning, philosophy in the afternoons, French authors first, Éluard, Colette, Camus, but she had a shelf reserved for translations, Woolf, Rilke, Neruda. One afternoon, I asked her why she placed Neruda between Nietzsche and Nin. "Because everything between them is a kind of longing," she said. That answer stayed with me longer than it should have. We began to speak more. Not long conversations, but ones that echoed after I left. She liked short sentences and long silences. I learned to fill in the spaces not with words, but with presence. We became something not yet a relationship, but no longer strangers. One evening, I offered to walk her home. The sky was violet with dusk, and the wind had teeth. "Don't be charming," she said. "It makes people foolish." "I'm not trying to be charming." "Then that's worse," she replied, without smiling. Her apartment was above the shop. One long staircase, creaky with use, ending in a hallway lined with postcards. Black and white photographs of cities she'd never visited. Rome, Prague, Lisbon. I remember the light that came from under her door, amber, like the inside of a bourbon bottle, and how the scent of cinnamon and candle wax met me at the threshold. "Coffee?" she asked. "I don't sleep well." She looked over her shoulder. "Neither do I." Her apartment was small, filled with mismatched furniture and stray books that formed cairns across the floor. There was music, faint from an old radio, a vinyl scratch, Chet Baker maybe, or Django Reinhardt, something lazy, nostalgic, soaked in smoke. We sat near the window. She poured coffee from a copper pot. No sugar, no cream. Bitter as ink. Warm as her wrist when it brushed mine. We spoke about ordinary things, the weather, her shop, my travels. But the pauses between topics were longer now, pregnant with something unspoken. "Do you always talk like this?" I asked. "Like what?" "Like you're quoting someone you once loved." She looked at me then, fully, and said, "No, I talk like someone who never said enough." Outside, it began to rain. The real kind. Not a drizzle, but a slow, deliberate fall. The kind that seeps into stone and lingers in the hem of your coat. We watched it in silence, our coffee cooling. "You'll write about this, won't you?" she asked. "Maybe." "Then do me a favor. Anything. Lie beautifully." I didn't answer. But in that moment something shifted. Not a declaration, not a kiss, just a glance held too long, a breath taken too shallow. Something softened between us. Something stirred, and I knew the story had begun, whether we spoke it aloud or not. There are silences that say more than speech ever could. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that settles into a room like candlelight, soft, golden, and warm at the edges. That night in Clemence's apartment, the silence grew thicker than the coffee in our cups. Neither of us moved to break it. It wrapped around us like a second skin, like breath shared under blankets. And still, we said nothing. She stood, eventually, walked over to the record player and flipped the vinyl, letting the crackle fill the room before the music returned. A slow, moaning jazz that felt like smoke curling around bare ankles. "You're staring," she said, back still turned to me. "I didn't realize," I lied. She glanced over her shoulder, her voice low. "You did." The shadows in her apartment weren't just from the lamps. They moved when she did, drifting across the walls like whispers trying to find form. Her dress rustled, linen, I think, brushing against her knees as she crossed the floor barefoot. She didn't sit back down. Instead, she leaned against the window frame and looked out into the rain. The glass had fogged over, softening the world beyond into smears of orange streetlight and blurred rooftops. "I don't like goodbyes," she said suddenly. "I haven't said one." "You will," she said. "Everyone does." There was no accusation in her voice, just certainty, like she'd lived it before. Maybe she had. I stood and joined her by the window, close but not quite touching. The air between us was warm from the radiator, but her skin gave off its own heat, something more alive, more magnetic. "You don't strike me as someone who lets people in," I said. She turned slightly toward me. "That's because I don't." "But you did." Her eyes lingered on mine, and in them I saw not vulnerability, but choice. This moment, whatever it was going to be, wouldn't be a surrender. It would be a decision. "You smell like paper and whiskey," she murmured. "And you smell like something I'll forget how to live without." Her breath caught. Then, "Don't ruin it with poetry." "I'm not. I mean it." The silence that followed was the kind that made time irrelevant. She reached up and touched the collar of my shirt, just briefly, fingertips grazing the fabric like she was checking if I was real. Then her palm flattened against my chest, and I swear, my heartbeat changed rhythm to match her touch. I didn't kiss her. She leaned forward first, and her forehead rested against mine. Our eyes closed, and in the darkness behind our eyelids, something settled. Not lust, not urgency, but permission. The kiss came like rain on old stone, quiet at first, then all-consuming. Her mouth was warm, searching, not hurried. Her lips parted with the gentleness of someone who had waited for this moment without ever admitting she wanted it. I felt her fingers slip into my hair, pull just enough to silence thought. My hands found her waist, so small, like she had been carved to be held. But I didn't tighten my grip. Not yet. I let her lead, and she did. Without a word, she moved backward, guiding us toward the bed tucked into the far corner of the room. It wasn't made. The sheets were tangled, the pillows misaligned, and somehow that made it feel more sacred, less staged, real. She paused only to light a second candle, then turned to face me again. The hem of her dress rose as she stepped onto the wooden platform, and for a moment, she stood above me, barefoot, glowing, her breath shallow. Then, slowly, she undid the tie at her waist. One knot, a sigh, and linen slid down her body like memory shedding itself. I didn't look away, not out of hunger, but reverence. She didn't ask me to undress. She simply reached for the buttons of my shirt and began undoing them, one by one, as if she were reading a story written across my skin. Each button, a sentence. Each sigh, a punctuation mark. By the time I lay beside her, the room had quieted to the point of heartbeat. The rain against the window slowed, the candlelight flickered but held, and we didn't speak. Instead, we moved as if we had always known each other, not in time, but in rhythm, in intuition. Her thigh brushed mine and stayed. Her breath danced along my jaw and settled behind my ear. And when her nails grazed the line of my back, I exhaled her name without meaning to. A prayer, not a plea. It was not frantic. There was no fumbling, no rush, only touch, only skin and shadow, and the realization that intimacy is not something you fall into, but something you create, second by second. We lingered in every breath, every shift, her hand in mine, her chest against mine, her heartbeat, steady and deep, like the sound of rain finding its rhythm. The world outside ceased to exist, and in its place was this room, this night, this woman who didn't believe in goodbyes, but still gave me something I'd never forget. Later, maybe hours, maybe minutes, we lay in silence again. But now it felt different, not empty, but full, like the hush that follows music played perfectly. She traced circles on my shoulder, absent-mindedly. I watched the candlelight flicker across the ceiling and knew I would write about this someday. "Are you going to leave tomorrow?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I don't know." She nodded, as if that was the answer she expected. "But I'll write you," I added. She smiled sadly. "Don't." "Why not?" "Because letters always arrive after it's too late." She rolled onto her side and faced the window. I watched her for a while, the curve of her back, the dip of her hip beneath the sheet, the loose strands of hair that clung to her cheek. Then I reached for her and pulled her against me, and this time, she didn't resist. The candle went out on its own, and we drifted, not into sleep, not yet, but into something quieter, something that had no name. I left without looking back. Some love stories aren't meant to be reread, they're meant to be dreamed of, to be returned to only in silence, in memory, or in sleep. Years passed. I traveled, taught, forgot, or tried to. But there were always reminders, small ones. A woman laughing on a train with the same cadence as her. A book misfiled in a shop in Lisbon. The smell of bergamot in an alley in Prague. She was there, in flickers, never enough to reach for, always enough to ache. And I never wrote the letter. Or maybe I did. Maybe this is it. The parchment before me is soft at the edges now, yellowed. The ink faded to grey. But I don't need to read it to remember. The story lives somewhere deeper, in the bones, in the breath, between sentences. And you, listener, you now carry it too. You've walked with me through Avignon, through silence and touch, through words unspoken and mornings unlived. And so, before I place this letter back into its drawer, beneath the beam that groans and the tile that never warms, let me leave you with this. Some people don't belong to our future. They belong to the places in us that memory built a home for. Let them stay there. Let them be warm. And when you sleep tonight, may you find your way to that quiet street in Avignon. May you hear jazz playing from a cracked window. May you smell linen and candlelight. May you feel the breath of someone who once kissed your name into your skin. And may you never need to say goodbye. The drawer closes. The ribbon is tied. The lamp flickers out. And all that remains is the sound of paper resting and your breath slowing as you fade into sleep. I woke before the sun. The room was steeped in a bluish shadow, the kind that only exists just before dawn, the color of unspoken words and nearly made decisions. Clémence was still asleep beside me, her back curled slightly, one hand tucked under her cheek. A sheet tangled around her hips, revealing the long curve of her spine and the soft press of her shoulder blades. She breathed in rhythms I could count, slow and steady, like pages turning in a book I wasn't ready to finish. I watched her for a long time, not out of longing, though there was that too, but because I knew this would be the last time I'd see her like this, and she must have known it too. Even in sleep, her expression carried a kind of quiet surrender, the kind that says, this is not the beginning, and it never was. This is the memory already being written. The floor creaked softly beneath my feet as I stood. I found my shirt near the end of the bed, one sleeve hanging off the chair like a question left unanswered. I didn't button it, just pulled it on, letting the morning cold press gently against my skin. Outside, the sky had started to bloom into soft orange. The rooftops of Avignon glistened with last night's rain. There was no one in the streets yet, no sound but the cooing of a dove somewhere out of sight, and the faint clink of glass as a baker arranged bottles behind closed shutters. The world was waking up, and I was already beginning to leave it. I didn't pack everything, just enough. The coat, the notebook, the letter I had started writing and never finished. It sat on the table where Clémence had left 2 cups of now cold coffee. The ink had dried, but not the feeling. I folded it once, not twice. No ribbon. It wasn't a letter meant to be sent, only remembered. She woke just as I reached for the door. "Don't go," she said. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even loud. It was just honest. I turned, unsure what to say. Not because I didn't want to stay, but because part of me already hadn't. I have to. She sat up, sheet clutched loosely against her chest, hair a mess of softness and sleep. Her eyes were unreadable, not sad exactly, not angry, just tired. "I told you not to write," she said. "I didn't." "Then why does it feel like you did?" "Because I had. Not on paper, but in the space between us, in the way we moved, the things we didn't say. Every moment was a sentence, every silence a paragraph, and now, this, the last page." I walked over, slowly, sat on the edge of the bed, reached for her hand. She let me hold it, and for a moment, just a moment, we let the illusion linger, that maybe, somehow, this wasn't the end, that maybe in some version of time we didn't get to live in I stayed, that maybe if I kissed her again, the whole world would pause long enough for us to stay in that breath forever. But we knew better. "I'll forget your name," I said. "No, you won't. You'll forget mine. I'll remember it every time it rains." She pulled me down into one last kiss. It didn't burn. It didn't ache. It simply was. Like the scent of pages turning. Like the warmth left behind on a pillow. Like everything we ever were, held in a breath. The glass bottle is nearly empty now. There's just enough perfume left to scent the space between memories. I unscrewed the silver cap this morning, carefully, reverently, and tilted the vial just slightly over a silk handkerchief. What rose up was not just fragrance, it was time. lavender, sea salt, a hint of orange blossom. But beneath that, something else. Warm skin, hotel linen, a breath caught just behind a half-laughed "don't." It was hers. I hadn't opened this bottle in years, decades maybe. It had been buried in one of the smaller drawers in the northern alcove of the archive, hidden behind a stack of telegrams and a Polaroid photograph with a thumbprint smudged over the eyes. And yet the moment the scent touched the air, the moment it kissed the dust light of morning, Venice, 1955, the Hotel Bella Vista. I wasn't supposed to be there. I told myself I needed rest, time to think, to recover from something I never admitted had broken me. I arrived with 2 suitcases and the intention of being entirely alone. But the city had other plans, and so did she. She had the kind of presence that disrupted quiet, not through volume. Her voice was rarely louder than a whisper, but through gravity. You simply noticed her, the way you notice a shift in the weather or the pull of the tide. Even when she wasn't looking at you, it felt like you were being seen. I met her on the hotel terrace just after dusk. There was a jazz trio playing soft behind tall plants in terracotta pots. The water glimmered below the balcony. The air was thick with the smell of basil, salt, and the warm stone cooling from the day's heat. I was writing something, nothing of importance, when I heard the sound of a camera shutter, twice. I turned, and there she was, holding a Polaroid like a secret she hadn't yet decided to share. "You photograph strangers?" I asked. "Only the ones who look like they're trying not to be noticed." "Do I?" "Very badly," she said. She wore a sundress, pale yellow. Her hair was swept up, messily, like she'd done it without a mirror. Her lipstick had faded slightly, but not carelessly, and around her neck was a thin ribbon of black velvet, a soft contrast to the warm skin just beneath it. She didn't offer her name, not then. She simply smiled, handed me one of the photographs and said, "I think you'll want this someday." She was right. I kept that photo for years, folded it into the back page of a travel book, which now lives, yellowing, on the 3rd shelf behind me. I never told her. I never forgot her face. The first moment that changed me wasn't when we kissed. That came later. It wasn't even when we touched. It was when she leaned toward me across a marble table in the lobby lounge, her wine glass leaving a ring beside the candle, and whispered, "You look like someone who hasn't been touched in a long time." She didn't say it to seduce. She said it the way a doctor might state a diagnosis, gently, clearly, without judgment. And she was right again. There's a kind of electricity that lives in silence when 2 people almost speak. We had hours like that, walking along the fondamenta in the late evenings, her arm brushing mine, sitting in a gondola, her breath lifting the fine hairs at the back of my neck as she leaned to take a photograph behind me. And in her room, not mine, where I first smelled the perfume, it was in a bottle on her vanity, pale glass, heavy stopper, the kind of bottle passed down, not bought. She dabbed it onto her wrist one night while facing the mirror. Then, without turning, extended her arm behind her and said, "Tell me what it reminds you of." I stepped close, took her wrist between my fingers, inhaled, and felt the world blur. It reminded me of everything I'd tried not to miss: warmth, closeness, the fear of falling, and the thrill of not caring. She turned, slow as moonlight sliding down the side of a building. Her eyes locked on mine, unblinking. Her skin glowed faintly from the lamp by the bedside. Her breath was steady, not teasing, not asking, inviting, and I remember the soft sound of her necklace sliding down her collarbone as she moved, the whisper of silk against her thighs. The moment her hand found mine, not pulling, just waiting, I didn't move. Neither did she. The moment stretched, a breath, then two, and in that stillness, something larger than touch passed between us. Desire that wasn't about bodies, but memory. She leaned in then, not to kiss me, but to speak into the space just behind my ear. "You'll remember this," she said, "even if you forget everything else." And I did. Decades later, here in this archive, her voice still finds me in quiet moments, in the echo of bare feet on stone floors, in the click of a camera shutter, in the hush of linen settling over a mattress still warm from sleep. I open the bottle now and again, just to feel her come back. And for you, tonight, I'll do more. I'll take you back with me, to Venice, to that terrace, to the edge of the water and the space between two breaths, where a woman in a yellow dress changed the way I remembered what closeness felt like. Come, let's return there together. I'll tell you the story, how it truly began. Venice reveals itself slowly, not through its churches or piazzas or gilded halls. Those are for the postcards. No, the true city lives in its in-betweens, the soft curve of an alley at dusk, the hush of water beneath footbridges, the way voices echo against stone walls and disappear into fog. And it was in one of those quiet corners, Calle del Forno, I think, where I saw her again. It had been 3 days since the terrace, 3 days since the photograph. I had walked the city on instinct, without map or destination. I told myself I wasn't looking for her, but when I saw her, sitting at a cafe table tucked just beside the canal, her elbows resting on a folded newspaper and a cigarette held loosely between her fingers, I realized I had been hoping for this from the moment I woke. She didn't look up at first. She was sketching something. A gondola, perhaps, or a face, though I never saw the page. Her brows drawn slightly, lips parted in quiet concentration. Her dress was darker this time, midnight blue, hair pinned messily again, one loose strand dancing in the breeze. I stood still, just a few steps away, waiting for her to notice. She didn't, so I cleared my throat. Nothing. Finally, I spoke. "Do you only photograph people, or do you draw them too?" She didn't jump, just raised her eyes, slow and calm, like she already knew I was there. "If they haunt me long enough," she said. I laughed. "Have I haunted you then?" She looked at me for a moment longer, then shrugged. "You linger." And with her free hand, she gestured to the chair across from her. The waiter brought coffee without being asked, 2 cups. He gave her a knowing smile. She gave him nothing in return. We sipped in silence for a while. Not awkward, not polite. Just two people, breathing the same space, letting time pass without explanation. At last, I asked, "Will you tell me your name?" She considered this for a moment. "No," she said. "Not yet." "Why?" "Because you'll start to believe this is real." I frowned. She smiled. "I like it better when things feel like dreams." She told me fragments, pieces of her life, offered out of sequence. She had once worked in a perfume shop in Marseille. She had a sister who lived in Prague. She had never married. She had once danced alone in a Venetian church until the guards came, but never a name, and never a question in return. She never asked where I was from, never asked why I was alone, never asked what I wanted. And I found that freeing. To be unnamed is to be unbound. To live in a story where your past is irrelevant and only the next sentence matters. We began to meet every evening after that, sometimes by accident, sometimes because one of us, always the other, left a note with the concierge, "Calle lunga." After 6, wear the coat. Sometimes we said nothing the entire evening, walking the water's edge until the lanterns blinked on, the city becoming a mirror of itself in gold and ripple. Other nights we talked for hours, about perfume, how scent is memory, about photography, how people always smile differently when they know it's a lie, about loneliness, not as a wound, but as a country you come to accept as home. And once, under a vine-draped archway off Campo San Barnaba, I asked her why she came here, to Venice, alone. She looked at the water, then said, "Because here, the past can't follow you without getting wet." She touched me, once, only once. We were seated on a bench in a tiny courtyard garden, the kind only locals know about. We were both watching an old woman hang sheets from a window above. The fabric billowed like sails. I had said something, trivial, forgettable, and she had laughed, a rare sound, brief and musical. Then she reached out, placed her hand on my knee, and kept it there. Just that. No pressure, no expectation, only warmth. And that warmth ran all the way up into my chest and settled beneath my collarbone, where it stayed for hours after. Later that night, in her room, finally her room again, she poured us wine and placed a single candle on the floor beside the bed. "You think too much," she said, handing me the glass. "I'm trying to remember every detail." "Don't," she said. "Memories betray you. Let the body remember instead." She stood, moved to the mirror, untied her velvet ribbon, and as she did, she asked me to stand behind her. I did, and in the mirror, our eyes met, not our reflections, but us, finally, wholly. Then she lifted her hair and said, "Put your hands here," and I placed them, not on her skin, not yet, but just above it. The air between us trembled, but we didn't kiss. Not that night. Instead, we lay on opposite sides of the bed, fully clothed, and listened to the church bells ring midnight. She reached across the sheets and took my hand, not out of hunger, out of recognition. And for hours, we simply stayed like that, fingers entwined, Two people who knew that closeness was not always touch, that sometimes the most intimate thing you can offer is patience. I never asked what we were. I never tried to define it, because I knew something she never said aloud. You cannot keep what was never meant to stay, but you can hold it for as long as it lets you. She let me in on the fourth night, not into her room. We had already crossed that threshold, but into something quieter, older, and infinitely more dangerous. It began with a gesture so small, I almost missed it. She was brushing her hair. The candlelight on the vanity flickered, casting gold across her shoulder. Each stroke of the brush moved with ritual calm, slow, deliberate, silent. She caught me watching her in the mirror, and instead of turning away, she held my gaze. Then, without a word, she picked up the bottle. The perfume. That perfume. The one with the pale glass and silver collar and a single air bubble sealed inside, like breath caught in amber. She uncorked it gently, as if waking something fragile, and with the tip of her finger, she dabbed a touch behind her left ear, then another at the hollow of her throat, and then, carefully, along the inside of her wrist. She paused, looked at me, said nothing, just offered the bottle across the space between us. I stood slowly, unsure if I should speak, unsure if I could. My fingers brushed hers as I took it. The glass was warm. I uncapped it and let the scent rise. Lavender, salt, and something deeper, something that wasn't a flower or a spice, but a memory already beginning. She turned her back to me. "Behind the neck," she said softly. So I approached, carefully, as if approaching flame. I placed a drop at the base of her nape, and the moment my fingertip made contact, she exhaled. Not a gasp, not a moan, just breath, carried low, long, deliberate. She didn't move away, she leaned into it. I let my hand rest there a second longer than needed, and felt her pulse beneath her skin. Then she reached up and took my hand in hers, lowering it. But she didn't let go. She turned around slowly, eyes upturned. "You don't need to ask," she said. But I did. Not with words, with stillness. With the way I stood before her, open, uncertain, present. And maybe that's why she stepped forward and pressed her forehead against mine, her hands resting lightly at my chest. Not pulling, just feeling. There are kisses that are forgettable, sweet, polite, expected. And then there are kisses that rewrite your understanding of time. Hers was the second kind. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't careful. It was certain. Her mouth found mine with a patience that made everything else in the world seem impatient by comparison. She tasted like wine and warmth, and something floral that lived not in the air, but in her. We didn't speak, not once. Words would have broken it. We moved like dancers in water, slow, weightless, attentive. Every button she undid felt like a season passing. Every breath I took on her shoulder was an entire poem I would never write. When her dress slipped from her shoulders, it did so like dusk falling. When my shirt dropped to the floor, it landed without a sound, like fog. We explored each other the way you explore a language you once spoke fluently and haven't heard in years, hesitant, reverent, but already remembering. Her hands were everywhere and nowhere. Her lips left echoes rather than marks. And when she pulled me down to the mattress, it wasn't gravity, it was invitation. What followed wasn't consummation, it was communion. The silence between our breaths was holy. The warmth of her thigh pressed against mine, the way her fingers circled my wrist, the way we moved not toward climax but toward something dissolving, like the last note of a violin hanging in the rafters of a church after everyone is gone. We stayed like that for what felt like forever. No rush, no beginning, no end, only presence. And I swear, at one point the candle flickered and she whispered, "I don't want this to be remembered. I want it to be relived." Later, after we had settled, she rested her head on my chest. Her fingers traced an idle pattern just above my heart, as if searching for a rhythm to echo, and she said, "It's strange. I've never felt so close to someone whose name I still don't know." I smiled. "You're the one who wouldn't tell me." "I know," she said, "and I still won't." "Why?" "Because names live in the future," she whispered, "and I only want this night." I don't remember falling asleep. I remember only the smell of the perfume still clinging to my skin, the heat of her breath at my collarbone, the feeling of her heartbeat sinking to mine, and the sense that something had just ended before it had even begun. I woke alone. The sheets beside me were still warm, as if she had only just left. Her perfume still hung in the air, fainter now, but present. And on the vanity, beside the mirror, the bottle stood open, empty, except for a small card tucked beneath it. I picked it up. There was no name, just 5 words, written in delicate script. "You will smell me forever." Years passed, and like most beautiful things that come without warning, she remained not as a timeline, but as a scent. I never saw her again after that night. I left Venice the next morning. The skies had turned the color of pewter, and the water outside the Bella Vista moved in slow, bruised waves. My bags were already packed from the night before, as if I had known something would end. And perhaps I did. The concierge handed me an envelope at checkout. No name, no address, just a single wax seal, pale blue, pressed with the imprint of a ribbon. It smelled faintly of her. Inside, there was no letter, only a folded piece of sheet music, blank staff lines, untouched, and beneath it, the velvet ribbon she had always worn around her neck. It felt like goodbye, but not the cruel kind, more like the kind you make in silence, while the other person is still asleep. Back in the archive, years later and far from Venice, I kept that ribbon in a drawer marked unsent, a section reserved for what was meant to be said, but never found the moment. And this morning, when I opened that drawer for the first time in a decade, something else was waiting for me. Tucked behind the ribbon, yellowed slightly with time, was a letter. One I swear was never there before. No date, no address. Just the words, "For when you forget the shape of my voice." My hands trembled as I unfolded the page, and this is what it said. "My love, I never intended to stay. That much You must have known. I was always made of movement, of train windows, cafe shadows, and photographs that never quite develop. But with you, I allowed myself to pause. I let time stretch across my skin. I let your silence press into me like sunlight into velvet. I remember how you looked at me when I gave you the perfume, not with hunger, not even with love, but with recognition, like you had finally found the book you didn't realize you were searching for. You asked for nothing, and yet somehow you received all of me. You told me once that scent is memory, so I gave you my scent, not to keep me alive, but to keep you company. I wonder what you'll remember first when it fades. My hands, my laugh, the heat of me at midnight, or will it be the way I whispered things into your shoulder, things I never dared to say into the air itself? I hope you'll forget my name. It's too small to hold what we were, but I hope you'll remember this, that there was once a woman who saw you, who touched the space between your thoughts, who left you, not because she wanted to, but because she belonged to no one, not even herself. And if you ever wake in the middle of the night, unsure if I was real, breathe in. If you catch even a hint of lavender and salt, know that I once breathed you in too, and I never exhaled, yours in silence always. I stared at the letter for a long time, not because I needed to process it, but because it completed something. The way a candle completes a darkened room, the way a sigh completes a kiss that never needed to go further. I didn't cry. I simply placed the letter back in its drawer, folded the ribbon carefully beside it, and then, with hands steadier than I expected, reached once more for the glass perfume bottle. There's barely anything left inside now, just enough for one more night. I uncapped it and let the final traces rise. Lavender, salt, orange blossom, and beneath it, her. The sound of bare feet on cold tiles, the rustle of linen beside me, the hush of her voice saying, "Don't remember my name, remember my scent." And I do. I always have. Now, dear listener, you've come with me this far. You've walked Venice's crooked alleys. You've seen her yellow dress, her blue one, her ribbon. You felt her touch in a mirror, heard her voice in a room, lit only by breath and candlelight. And so I leave this scent with you, too. Even if you never meet her, because some people aren't meant to be kept, they're meant to be shared, as stories, as sighs, as scents that drift into dreams. So tonight, as you sleep, if you find yourself standing in a room you don't recognize, if the floor beneath you is marble, and a ribbon waits on the pillow beside you, breathe in and let her return to you. She always does. If this story whispered something to you tonight, leave a comment and share a memory, a thought, or even just your city and the hour you're listening. And if you'd like to drift into more stories like this, gently subscribe. I'll be here, waiting with another memory, whenever you're ready to fall asleep inside a story. Sleep Alchemist.